Today, the budget crawler's getting a new set of fenders. Now what we have here are a genuine, very used set of Genright flat fenders. It's basically just this outer fender structure here attached to the factory TJ inner fender structure, which is this orange part here. So these obviously came off of a Jeep that must have been orange. And the way I got these was actually from a local four-wheel drive shop, and I was kind of lucky with how I ended up with them. So basically I went to the four-wheel drive shop to pick something else up. I know they deal with a lot of Jeeps, so I asked if they had any rotted TJ fenders, because where I live, TJ fenders just rot out notoriously. So basically I just wanted a set of rotted stock fenders so I could make my own outer structure here. I was going to kind of use that as an excuse to buy a tube bender, which I've kind of been wanting to pick up for a while. But it just so happened that they had these things sitting out in their yard, and they're kind of their scrap pile. I don't think they planned on keeping them for too much longer. So $150 later I walked out with these things, and today we're going to clean them up. The top side doesn't look too bad. We can see there's some holes along here. I think that the guy who had these before had some plastic fenders that he extended off of here for passing safety inspection in the state that he lived in. And I actually have one of those still, but I don't plan on putting them on, so I'm going to weld these holes back up. And same thing on this one here. But these inner fenders seem a little crunched up, so I might have to do some banging with a hammer on these to make them fit right. I'm just going to check for square, make sure that everything seems straight on the Genright portion. Then we're going to paint everything up, and then we'll go ahead and install, because I don't want to have to pull these on and off a bunch of times. You see here on this one, looks like that part of the fender must have been pretty rotted, so there's a little patch panel on there. We'll see about maybe replacing that. Probably not, but maybe. And if we flip them over, we can see that the bottom is pretty rusty on both of these. I don't think anything's rusted through. We should just be able to clean it up and paint it, but it's going to be kind of a pain. Basically, this is just where all the road salt splashes up inside these things, and that's probably why the bottom is so rusty on here. So I'm going to tear these things apart. We'll pull the inner fenders out, pull all the hardware and everything off, and then I'll clean them up, paint them. And I think the next thing that you'll see is the cleaned up version that's ready for install. Fast forward about a year from that last video clip, we've got our fenders painted and we are ready for install. So you can still see a little bit of pitting and some imperfections in the metal because these were so rusty, but I think they came out pretty well and I'm happy with them for the price I paid. So what I did to refinish them was I went over them with a needle scaler, and I used a wire cup brush on an angle grinder to clean up the rest of it. And I actually used some stuff that one of you guys recommended, which was an OSPO rust converting spray. So I sprayed these down with the OSPO. Then I used an etching primer and a Rust-Oleum gloss black to finish them out. So we'll see how all this holds up over time, but so far I like the results. We'll just do one last quick walk around here so we have something to compare to after we put the new fenders on. And you guys will probably remember a while back we did that video where we trimmed the factory flares, and I really like how they came out. I don't think we're going to gain a whole lot of clearance on these tube fenders that we're putting on over the trimmed flare, just because of the style of them. If we're putting on highline fenders, then we'd obviously be gaining some clearance, or if we're putting on metal cloaks, we'd be gaining some clearance, but I don't think we're going to get a whole lot more up travel from the wheel, just because we did trim these flares so flat a while back. But the new fenders will be a lot more durable, and we won't have to worry about crunching them up off-road. I think I'm going to start with the passenger side, so let's get to work. Alright, we finally got the passenger side fender removed, and as you can see we ended up pulling the grill as well, because so there's a vacuum box that goes on the inner fender right underneath this tray, but it looks like at some point this battery must have started leaking, because everything right around here was super corroded, more corroded than anything else on the Jeep. Now this Jeep has seen road salt, so it is fairly corroded throughout. I cleaned up the frame already, so that looks nice and black, but aside from that, this is probably the rustiest spot. So basically there's a bunch of bolts on here. here, 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 and here. And these bolts go into what they call speed nuts, which is basically this thing right here. So this clips over a piece of metal, one side's threaded and the other side, the bolt just passes through. And this shouldn't be two pieces. So when these go in with brand new hardware, they're great. When the hardware stays clean, they're great. But as soon as a bolt starts rusting, when you try to take the bolt out, they basically snap like this. And that's what happened to 3 out of the 4 on here. So I wasn't able to get access to the vacuum box, which means that the fender couldn't go up, it had to go forward, and the grill was in the way. Alright, we've got the fenders all pulled off, and you can kind of see a little bit of new paint I put on there. So I repainted the frame a while back, and there were some spots that were hard to get to because those fenders were on there, so I took advantage of those being off, cleaned up the frame a little more, and painted it up. So this paint's going to have to dry a while in a few spots before I bolt this stuff back together. It's got like a, I think the can says like a 7-day drying time, but I've found that a couple weeks is usually a little better. The paint's still pretty soft around a week. So probably this Jeep's going to be apart for a few weeks, and then I'll get the new fenders on and we'll be ready to go. But for now, I'm just going to put the grill back on so that I can bolt the radiator to it, and then we'll be able to close the hood to keep water off the engine. And here's how it'll sit for a little while. Now it's kind of funny. This is a 4-cylinder, so the engine ends right here. Then we've got this big gap to the radiator in the grill, and then this big space in front where the steering box is mounted. And I remember seeing an article in JP Magazine a while back where they did a TJ, a 4-cylinder TJ, and they called it the shrink rate TJ. And basically they chopped off this area in the front right here, pushed the grill back, and then got a better approach angle without altering the wheelbase. And they did the same thing in the back end too. And that is actually something I considered initially when I bought this Jeep. But without the fenders on here, it's just so obvious how much room you can gain by pushing the grill back. It's kind of interesting. We are on our way to getting these things all bolted up, and we ran into a little snag here. I've got the inner fender bolted in, and then I set the outer fender, the Genright piece, on top of the inner fender, and it's not quite lining up with the body. So I did a little bit of research, and as it turns out, where the fender meets up with these, I guess on this side it's a battery bracket, but there's another bracket on the other side. It's basically the same thing, just mirrored. Where it meets up with that, we're going to need to do a little bit of modification. Now these are nice clean factory brackets I have on here, and I'm really not looking to modify them. Luckily when I bought these fenders, the guy I bought them from gave me another set of brackets, and now I know why. Because this little piece right here needs to be bent in order to accommodate the fender. So this side you can kind of see this one's pretty flat, and then this one's bent. So from the factory this one's flat, and this was bent in order to make the fenders fit. These were pretty rusty and banged up when I got them, so I pounded them out and cleaned them up, painted them, and let's go ahead and get them installed. Well, we've basically got the fender all bolted up here. I think it's a pretty good look. Definitely happy with this style. Really just got a couple things left to do to wrap this side up. I got to put the battery tray back in there, mount the brackets back on here for the fuse box, a few other things, route the wiring through the fender again. And then we need to attach the outer fender to the inner fender. And to do that, I've got these stainless steel button head screws. So you can see a bunch of holes drilled on the back side of the outer flare here. And that's where the bolts are going to go through. So I'll just take a drill bit, run it through that hole, and extend the hole down through the inner flare, and we'll bolt them together that way. And here's basically the final product. These are fully installed now. I've got most of this engine bay reassembled. All the wiring is back in. Pretty much everything's ready to go. The only thing I have left to do is get some marker lights down here, and I'll have to mess with the wiring a little bit to get those in. So I'm waiting to put the coolant expansion tank back in because it's going to be easier to change the wires without that there. But everything else is all set. It was a pretty straightforward install. The only thing that was a little bit of a pain was I didn't realize that the inner lip on these Genright fenders kind of folds in a little bit to get a little more tire clearance, I assume. And then I also had to tilt the battery a little bit. So the battery, this corner of the battery is where it pretty much usually sits and it comes straight across. But since that fender is angled like that, I had to twist the battery tray. So I re-drilled the 2 holes on this side. I was able to use the existing holes on this side. And now the battery's just at a little bit of an angle. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. We've got basically everything installed. I've got the fenders installed, we got the grill back on, everything's back together. The only thing we have left to do is figure out what we're doing for marker lights. And this video is getting a little bit long, so I'm going to address that in the next video. I do have plans, so stay tuned for that one. And that's just what the wire is hanging down here and over there. So I'm really happy with how these came out. The paint actually came out really well. I had to paint them like 3 times. So like I said earlier, it was a year between when I got these and when I installed them. So I got them, I cleaned them up, I painted them, the paint got damaged, I repainted them, and then I got a bunch of blue house paint all over them when the house was being painted, and I had to repaint them again. So they've basically got 3 coats of paint on them, which actually helped smooth them out quite a bit. So a lot of the pitting that was in there from all the rust is kind of smoothed over now. You can see a lot of ripples if you get it in the right light, but you know, obviously this isn't a show Jeep anyway, so I'm pretty happy with them. And in my opinion, these are the second best looking TJ fenders on the market that I'm aware of. My favorites are the metal cloak high arch fenders. I think those are kind of a love it or a hate it look, and I'm definitely not in the hate it camp on that one. But these Genrights are some good looking fenders too. Like I said, I don't think we gain much up travel vertically with the tire. So if the whole axle comes up as a 1, I don't think we're going to be able to go up any higher than we would have before the tire hits the fender. Now, the only spot where we may have gained something as far as clearance would be, you can see how the fender curves in towards the grill here. And it basically, at the midpoint of the tire, so where the axle basically would extend to, there's about half the tire hanging out past the fender. And where that'll be nice is when the axle starts to twist and let's say this side comes up, the outside of the tire will be able to go beyond the bottom level of the fender just because it's hanging out more, so the tire can come up a little bit. It's kind of minimal, but it is a little bit of a gain, so can't discredit it. But the biggest thing we're getting out of these is durability. I was really worried about crunching up the front fenders, the factory ones. Number 1, because I didn't want to have to replace them because I had to. And number 2, because they were pretty nice, and I really didn't want to bang them up off-road. But like I said, that's pretty much it. And we'll leave with a few walk-around clips here. So today was a relatively cheap day in the build of the budget crawler. We got these fenders for 150 bucks, which was a pretty good deal. They were a little rusty, and I think one of them was a little bit bent because it didn't line up quite right with the grill, but we got it on there. So these are listed for I think 700 bucks on Genright's website right now. So I think for 150 bucks and a little elbow grease, we did pretty good. Like I said, I had to paint these 3 times, and then we had the stainless hardware, which I actually already had. I didn't have to buy that, but I guess anyone else would have to buy that. Then I had to replace some speed nuts, like I showed you, those ones that broke in the battery tray. And a couple other ones broke while I was taking the fenders off, so I had to replace those. So we're going to ballpark all that stuff at 50 bucks. That might be a little low on the estimate. Could be another 10 or 15 beyond that, but I think 50 is a fair number, so that puts us at 200 for the day and just over 6,900 bucks for the build so far. Next episode, we'll get the marker lights all set up, so you can look forward to that. And as usual, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next one.